I'm Cadet Second Class Aditya Nair, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to NCLS, which aligns with our celebration of 250 years of America, defending freedom. This session features Col Justin Elliott, United States Air Force. Colonel Elliott is a Division Chief for NORAD and U.S. Northcom's Integrated Operations Division at Peterson Space Force Base, Colorado. In this role, he supervises 200 operators from 9 U.S. and Canadian military branches, overseeing the execution of current and future NORAD and U.S. Northcom operations across all domains. He has previously served in the F-15E and F-35 squadrons as an instructor pilot and an evaluator, as a weapons instructor and operational test pilot in the 422nd Test and Evaluation Squadron, and as an experimental test pilot in the 40th Flight Test Squadron, 96th Test Wing, Eglin Air Force Base, Florida. Colonel Elliott commanded the 59th Test and Evaluation Squadron at Nellis Air Force Base, Nevada, where he led the test and evaluation of the F-35, F-22, F-15EX, F-15E, F-16, and the A-10. More recently, he served as the commander of the U.S. Air Force Air Demonstration Squadron, the Thunderbirds, leading the team through 150 air shows across 70 U.S. and international cities, while flying his F-16 mere inches apart from others at speeds exceeding over 600 miles per hour. Please join me in welcoming Colonel Justin Elliott.
Thanks, man. Sir. Hello, everybody. It is not lost on me whatsoever that we just had lunch and that you guys have the opportunity to be free on a Saturday and go out there and do things in the real world. So thank you, sincerely thank you for being here to listen to this story a little bit. It's an amazing opportunity to be able to talk to you. And I actually saw smoke coming out of that machine a little bit earlier. That's something I've never seen on a stage before. We're going to test something here. Smoke on, ready now. No, okay, no control. All right. So I'm going to tell you guys a little bit of a story of reform today. It happened. Well, that's it. All right. All right, so I'm going to tell you guys a little bit of a story of reform today. And before I do that, I think it's really important to alibi up front that when you talk about reform of an organization, it is very tempting to see that as a statement that someone before you did something wrong, that one of the leaders in the position before you messed up, and that's not the case. You know, there's two things I want you all to keep in mind as you go on to become leaders in the Air Force and in the world. One is that you should never judge the leader in front of you, the person that previously occupied your position, because there are a lot of macro forces in this world, and they often affect what you plan to do when you take command of an organization. And that's a very real thing. You know, you can ask any commander who's ever been in a leadership position, and what you'll probably find is that there are many times when you step into that new position and you have all these great visions and all these great ideas in your mind about how you're going to make that better, and you have these great plans, only to be hit by some completely new reality. New economic situation in the world, new war, new conflict, or a pandemic, which was the most recent one that I think we all remember in our lives. The second thing you've got to remember about being in any leadership position is that your goal is always to make the organization better than you found it, to make sure that the best version of that organization is not one from the past and is not even yours, but the one in front of you, the one in the far distance. That's what you're setting that thing up for. These macro changes in our environments can be extremely disruptive. The most recent one in my memory when I was a young commander was COVID, the pandemic in 2020, extremely disruptive, with one really interesting macro effect on our society, and it's that it was an extremely divisive time for the United States. It was ultimately a battle between two rights that we all kind of fought out and tried to assess the situation we were in. And I'll tell you right now that battles between right and wrong, those are really easy. Those kind of decisions are really easy. Decisions between two rights are a lot harder, and you'll find yourself in those situations often, unfortunately. You know, in this case, you had the right to protect individual liberties and freedoms, and also the right to protect the weak and old and infirm, right? And those two things clashed. It was a very divided time for the United States. What I'll tell you, though, is that there's always a COVID. There's always some excuse in the larger environment that you can use to let your organization fall apart or to not push quite as hard as you think you should. And I'm going to give you just a couple of examples from my life. So I started ROTC on September 11th, 2001. The September 11th that you read about in the books, that was my first day of ROTC. So the Air Force I thought I was going into turned out to be a pretty different situation that shaped the next 20 years of my career. 2005 was the first time in history we actually had gas prices over $5, believe it or not. You know, we still, 20 years of inflation later, think about that as a big deal. 2005 was the first time we saw that. In 2008, the entire US economy, the entire world economy melted down. $17 trillion disappeared, real estate prices were slashed down to 10% of their original values. It was enormously disruptive to society. In 2013, as a fighter pilot in an operational test squadron, we stopped flying for 45 days for what is now referred to as a government shutdown. We called it sequestration, which is when we had no idea if we were ever going to have a budget to fly again. And in 2018, a hurricane wiped an entire Air Force base off the map in Florida, more damage than any of our enemies could have done for us. So these disruptive macro environment changes like the pandemic, I promise you that they're always going to be there. Thank you. Organizations go through these waves as well. Organizations go through their ups and downs. They go through these cultural cycles, these cultural waves. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the environment that my predecessor, Colonel John Caldwell, 𝐂𝐨𝐮𝐫𝐚, Brick, graduate from this academy, an incredible human being. If you ever meet him, shake his hand and say thank you for what he did for this team behind you. Because he inherited an environment when he took command of the Thunderbirds just prior to the pandemic. And here's how that looked. The team had just had 3 Class A mishaps. That means 3 total losses of the aircraft, complete crashes. It had a fatal accident that killed 𝐂𝐥𝐻𝐿. The commander leader before him had been fired from the job. The director of operations had taken over for the previous year and was holding down the fort. And the demonstration at the time looked like the picture that I have on the left right here, okay? And when you look at that picture on the left up on the top screen, what I want you to process is that is the Diamond Pass and Review. That is supposed to be the tightest formation achievable by humankind. It is supposed to be that beacon of excellence that shows us the art of the possible in human achievement. And what you see instead is wide. It's about 16-foot wingtip spacing between number 2 and number 3. You know, almost a wingspan in there. It's asymmetric. It's great. It's very hard to do that, but it's not that pinnacle of aviation. And that drift had started slowly. And Brick was trying to figure out how we got here. How are we crashing airplanes? How did we get to a point where we're flying wide and we're okay with it? And that is a very difficult challenge to break down when you're a new commander in that situation. Because it seems really hard, by the way, to even fly that. So there's a lot of excuses you can make for yourself to accept that as the standard. And the other thing that was affecting us at the time, and this is really important to process, is that application numbers were down. So we were at a period where our application numbers were starting to reach an all-time low on the team. And by the way, I have seen the Fighter Weapons School go through this, and I have seen Test Pilot School go through the exact same thing, where you have lower applicant numbers for some reason, and you have this constant pressure to lower the bar. If only I give up that flying hour requirement, or maybe reduce my character standards, maybe, just maybe, I can get more people to apply, generate some competition, and bring this thing back to life. That pressure is there. So Brick knew something was wrong, but it was really hard for him to put his finger on what that might have been. It seemed completely unfixable. Was it the hiring process that was not finding the right people? Were we not training hard enough as a team? Was it just that pilots in the Air Force were getting worse to a point that the quality just wasn't there? Was the whole Air Force maybe just falling apart? You know, he didn't know. All these things, they hit your mind, right? You start to think about, man, maybe this is just an unfixable situation. And then COVID hit in 2020, and it canceled their entire show season. And Brick took that time to do a little bit of introspection, to really think about this problem deeply in the time that he had with that down season, with his original pilots that he got to keep for an extra year. And so in that introspection, of all the things that we dove into, I was the commander down the street, by the way, in the 59th, and we talked about this stuff. And of all the things that we could come up with, what we had decided was that the team had been hit by a wave of self-promotion. The way Brick would say it, if he was standing here right now, is he would say that he found that people were joining the Thunderbirds to suck the life out of that 70-year-old brand, to build their personal brand, to go on to become famous people and leave the Air Force. Not the right message. Instead, he needed to build a team where people were joining to pour themselves into the team's brand, into America's brand, and then expect nothing in return after leaving it all on the field for several years. That's tough, right? And so when I talk about that wave of self-promotion, I think that temptation is always there for us. But starting in around 2007, we had the platforms to do exactly that for the first time. And as social media started to develop, our language changed. When you look at society as a whole, you go back 20 years or so, calling someone a self-promoter, that was a very negative thing. That was not something that we were proud of. And then you started to hear people say things like, well, if you can't sell yourself, who's going to do it for you? You start to see our culture shift. You start to see our environment shift to the point that society as a whole started to blend into this new mindset. By the way, that led to a dangerous mindset on the team. You started to hear things creep into the culture like, why fly so close and so low to the ground and so tight to the crowd? The crowd can't tell anybody alive. In fact, I get a whole lot more PR if I take one really good in-cockpit photo and post that on Instagram. And I get a whole lot of followers. So I'm reaching further via social media. Those live presentations, do they really mean anything anymore when I can take one big picture? The result of that drift is the picture you see on the left. If you go back to 2020, if you Googled Thunderbirds, if you Wikipedia'd Thunderbirds, that was the picture. That was the first picture that would show up, despite the fact that for 70 years, this team was flying unbelievable levels of performance. That was the picture that showed up. It was that pervasive. And it took way too long for all of us to catch on to the danger of this self-promotion drift that was starting to sink in, not just in an elite team, but all throughout our society. Even though it's a clear departure from our values. Now, I can do this with any set of values that we have over time, but I'm going to choose to use the Weapons School's values from Nellis Air Force Base because I find those to be very touching. Weapons School is widely considered to be one of the premier leadership courses on this planet. And the motto of Weapons School is, be humble, be approachable, be credible. I think those are very easy values to get behind, right? There's nothing humble about a selfie. There's nothing approachable about anonymity. And there's nothing credible about platforms that reward the most extreme viewpoints over those of experts and professionals and moderate viewpoints. So despite a clear departure from our values, that's what society was starting to lock onto. And so I had a discussion with General Kelly. He was the 4-star Air Combat Command commander who was hiring for the team. And it was actually my interview for the team. And it was a pretty one-way conversation from him. And what he basically said was, you've got a decision to make. Societal norms are that social media, these networks, this self-promotion, it is an entitlement. It's assumed, it's popular, it's trendy, it's hot. Do you stay with it, or do you plant the flag and say, boom, this is our elite team, this is who we are, you join us, or don't, that's up to you. But if you join us, these are our values, this is what we believe in, and this is what this organization stands for. But if you're going to plant that flag in the ground and say, this is who we are, you join us, you have to have a crystal clear defining purpose of that organization. And it cannot be recruiting. I will say this, I believe this from the bottom of my heart, you do not recruit by recruiting. You recruit by being extraordinary, by being the hardest thing, the thing that people want to be a part of. A lot like what you guys decided to do when you joined this institution right here, or signed up for ROTC for those of you who traveled for this. You wanted to join the hardest thing. No one told you to do it. You decided to do it on your own. That same philosophy applies to elite teams. And yet, if you went and talked to a Thunderbird from back in that last decade, most of them would tell you, what's the purpose of this team? Recruit, retain, and inspire, in that order. And I think that's completely flipped. We had to find something better than that. So the answer actually lied in history, believe it or not. The very first demonstration team in the United States was not the Thunderbirds. It was the U.S. Navy's Blue Angels. Now, why were they founded in 1946? Because in 1947, this new thing was about to happen called the U.S. Air Force. And the Navy was afraid of losing its aviation wing to the Air Force, believe it or not. So they wanted to create this organization that demonstrates how amazing the U.S. Navy's aviation wings are. And so they founded the Blue Angels. And when you look at the Blue Angels, you can see it right there in the paint job. They are blue and gold. They have U.S. Navy in huge letters across the bottom of the jets, and those are still there. So that is an organization that is meant to recruit and identify for the United States Navy. Well, why then were the Thunderbirds founded? The Air Force did not have a recruiting problem. In fact, the Navy's recruiting campaign was working pretty well for us too. People thought about the Air Force when they thought about flying. So we were just fine on the recruiting side. What we had though in 1953 was the beginnings of a break in trust between the American population and their institutions. We were smack in the middle of the Korean War. Jets were coming online instead of propellers. There was a trust breach that was starting to happen. We needed a way to stitch that together. So the Thunderbirds were founded not as a recruiting tool for the Air Force, or they'd be blue and silver, by the way, and have Air Force in huge letters across the bottom, but as America's team. Red, white, and blue. A uniting force meant to bring people together in divided times, to demonstrate human achievement in the service to something bigger than ourselves, to build trust in our population and bring the government back together. That's a very different mission set. A mission set that's meant to inspire not just people who want to join the military, but all Americans, the other 99.5%, to reach out and do something bigger than themselves. And that was the mission we needed to start to get behind. Instead of a team that felt like we were, the city we were visiting should be honored to receive us, we were a team that would show up and give as much as we possibly could. We had to shift that mindset to a giving team, one that was there in the name of service to something bigger. I want to touch a little bit further on this concept of the uniting force of human achievement. These examples are actually everywhere in our society if you just look. The reason we're all watching the Olympics right now is because of exactly that. We unite as people, no matter how divided we are, we unite around human achievement. Human achievement. I ask you to consider, if this was 6 drones or 4 drones flying close together, would you even care? Probably not. If you could make a robot that beat Michael Phelps in a pool, great. I'm sure we can do that. No one would care. Same thing with any event, right? We unite around human achievement. It's why we go to watch extraordinary musicians play, why we go to watch amazing things in theater, why we go to watch the Thunderbirds, why we go to watch sports events. We want to see humans achieve. And that was the mission that we had to kind of get around. But if you're going to be that, you have to be truly a beacon of excellence. And you have to do it with a service-oriented mindset. You have to be a giving team. You have to be approachable. And you have to be amazing. So with that new purpose in mind, here are the things that we actually did to change the team to get towards that goal. And listen to this, because turning something into extraordinary is not going to happen without some work. So we changed our hiring process. Instead of a get-in-line philosophy, and based on who you knew and how many followers you had, we had flying evaluations. Now, those flying evaluations were intentionally impossible. If you wanted to join the team, you would have to jump in an F-16 and fly loops and rolls in a burst on my wing. You couldn't do it. There was no way you could do it, in fact, and that was the whole point. It was a character evaluation disguised as a flying evaluation. Here's what we were looking for. Were you the kind of person that needed to be on that team so badly that you were willing to kill yourself in that flying evaluation and fly dangerously? I didn't want that. Were you the kind of person that was like, no thanks, I'll stay out here, that looks scary, I don't want that either. I want someone who has the character to try, to put themselves out there, have the courage to get in and give it a shot, but know where their boundaries are. And most importantly, accept a debrief afterwards. Not the person that's blaming the environment around them, but the person that's going, yep, I messed up, and please tell me how to get better. So that was a character evaluation disguised as a flight eval. We increased our flight rates by 68%. Now, remember, the Thunderbirds is not 6 demonstration pilots. It's 135 people, 32 different AFSCs in one squadron. So to convince the team to produce the maintenance and the lines and the logistics and all of that to fly a 68% increase in sortie rate, that was a big deal, and that took a lot of buy-in in the purpose that we were getting behind. We doubled our training. We were flying 2 to 3 times a day, no weekends, and we deployed for winter training for the first time. Instead of flying at Nellis only in one environment, and then taking the team on the road in March to airfields that are not Air Force with no backshops, we would deploy every 2 weeks to exercise the logistics part of our team so that it wasn't a shock when we hit show season in March. Maybe most importantly, no more influences in our back seats. So we intentionally kicked out the people that, the old philosophy was, hey, if you have a lot of outreach, if you have a big followership, then I'll throw you in the back seat and we'll use your brand to promote ours. And that was exactly the wrong message. These were people who did nothing with their lives except tweet all day. So instead, we reversed it. We looked for hometown heroes. We looked for people who gave, sometimes bus drivers, sometimes policemen, right? People who gave, did something extraordinary and asked for nothing in return. We used our brand to build theirs, that giving team philosophy. No more social media for the team. You can kind of imagine how that would have gone over. given that it feels a lot like an entitlement. Now, you could do anything you want as Air Force Thunderbird 4 so that that brand stays with the team when you walk out the door, but you couldn't do it on your personal account and take that with you when you leave. Well, again, it was the wrong message. So what was the result of all this? This all sounds crazy, right? Sounds like a huge ask for a team that was already struggling with application numbers as it was, struggling to get people onto the team. Now we're going to make everything harder, take away all the personal benefits, and just ask you to give that much more. And believe it or not, with that shared sense of purpose, it did not take a firm hand at all. In fact, I was able to stay pretty nice through the whole thing because people believed in what we were trying to do. And it became a pretty loving culture after all. And the result of it was that we were able to get our wingtips within that year down to 7 inches, the picture that you see on the right. So number 2 and number 3 in that picture cannot see each other. They are looking only at a single bolt on the bottom of my aircraft. In fact, they put a little sticker underneath it for the positions as they start to move in. And they are flying off of that bolt, off of that rivet, and have no idea what number 3 is doing next to them. All right, so they are 7 inches apart at those wingtips with zero awareness of, and a lot of trust in the person next to them that they're flying their position on their bolt as well, and that number 4 threat there is jammed up between those wingtips. You can literally read her lineup card there. She's so close to their wingtips. And all that takes a whole lot of trust, but we were able to build that by having that unifying sense of purpose. But here's the thing. That's cool, but that's not the real validation of what I'm talking about. The real validation was when we did that, the very next year, we tripled our applicant numbers. People ran towards the hardest thing. And the year after that, we went 14-1. Enormous applicant ratio. We were able to be very selective. And remember, we did that by making everything worse and everything harder. People run towards the hardest thing. People do not run towards mediocrity. We want to be a part of something extraordinary. So when you're facing that temptation to lower the bar, do exactly the opposite. And that's how you'll draw people to what you stand for and generate that elite team. Now, I recognize that when I talk about a shared sense of purpose, a lot of you are thinking, yeah, that's really easy to do when you're reforming the Thunderbirds and representing the entire United States out there. I get that. And I want to give you a couple of things that I learned through the process and my time in the Air Force that I truly believe apply to all of us in every single thing that we do. All right, these are 2 lessons that I've learned that hopefully will sink in with you guys a little bit. So the first one is, we as humans are very happy. We thrive, in fact, when we are playing offense. We are not very good at sustainment, and we are absolutely horrible at playing defense. You know, think about when you earn your wealth and then you turn around and start defending that wealth, that's a bad thing. When you are climbing a ladder and then you say, man, I think I've made it, I'm high enough here, I'm going to now turn around and start kicking people off that ladder to make sure I maintain my position, right? You have converted from offense to defense. That is a bad behavior. We are not very good at that, and we are not very happy in that environment. Think about that feeling you get when you're running a road race or doing any kind of competition and you hear those footsteps coming up behind you. It's a horrible feeling. You know, likewise, it's a very good feeling when you are charging ahead and you're starting to pass people. We are very good at playing offense. I'm actually going to prove this to you using a technique I learned from the U.S. Air Force Test Pilot School, which is an amazing institution, and they teach a concept. It's a flying concept, but they teach a concept called boundary avoidance theory, which they can prove to us. In fact, you can prove it to yourself driving home. You probably prove it to yourself walking home, but you're going to need a pretty narrow haul. But what they'll do to us, they'll prove that if I give a pilot a task and I say, point at that target and go there, and stare at that target and fly in that direction and hit it, you can do it every time. If I give you the exact same task, but instead I say, go that direction and do not hit the boundaries on either side of you, whatever it takes, do not hit those walls, you will PIO, which is a pilot-induced oscillation, grow in amplitude and hit one of those walls every single time. They prove it to you over and over. They can even prove it to you on a taxi test. They'll say, follow the black stripe. Easy. Then they'll say, okay, do not hit the yellow stripes on either side of the black stripe. Impossible. PIO, amplitude. We are terrible as people at avoiding boundaries and playing defense. We need a target to work towards. One of the ways we applied that on the Thunderbirds is even when they were that good, we made up new formations and we made them push towards something else. So they never get out of that offensive goal-driven mindset and never get to a point where they're comfortable and thinking about other things and trying to defend what they feel like they've earned. All right, it is a constant push through the entire show season towards tighter formations, lower to the ground, and closer to the crowd. And believe it or not, that mindset keeps you safer because you are always thinking about moving forward, never moving away or moving backwards. All right, the second thing that I want to give to you guys is that you are tired from what you are about to do, not from what you've just done. It's one of the most fascinating things about our minds. I have no idea why we're like this. It's insane. But I'll prove it to you. What's a better day, Friday or Monday? Friday, right? That makes no sense. You've just worked all week. You should be exhausted, and yet you're on cloud nine. You're excited, right? Because you're looking forward to the weekend. Let's reverse that. Sunday night, worst feeling ever. And that makes no sense. You should be like fired up. You just had a whole break. You're tired from what you're about to do, not from what you've just done. And when you keep that in mind and you put that together with what I talked about offense versus defense, it starts to come together how to handle your days. Even though you're dreading it, even though you're dreading the new thing, the new project you want to tackle, the new thing that you know in the back of your mind you probably should get after, just do it. And I promise once you start, you'll be less tired, more motivated, and you'll be able to play offense and move through that. And that's something we really tried to keep in mind in our team mentality. So with that, I'm going to zoom out just a little bit. I'm going to read you something because it really sunk in with me when I read this. I'm not going to tell you where this comes from. Somebody out there is going to know, and that's okay. Hold on to that while I read you some quotes. And what I want to get at here is, what if the macro environment that we're in is actually starting to seep in? Despite understanding the micro-organization changes you can make in your own psychology, what if the environment we're in right now is just that hard? All right, what if we're starting to lose confidence a little bit in the United States? And that's not a political statement. 50% of you were happy 4 years ago. 50% of you are happy these 4 years. That's statistically accurate. That's just the way it is. But I think what we can all admit is that there's a lot of division right now, and there's a bit of a challenge in our confidence right now. And I want to address that by reading a few things to you, and I will tell you at the end where this came from. So bear with me. This is not me. Here we go. Our people are losing faith not only in the government itself, but in our ability as citizens to serve as the ultimate rulers and shapers of our democracy. In a nation once proud of hard work, strong families, and close-knit communities, and faith, too many of us now worship self-indulgence. For the first time in history, a majority of people believe that our next 5 years will be worse than our last 5 years. There is a growing disrespect for our government, for our churches, for our schools, for the media, and for our institutions. We were taught that our armies were invincible and our causes were always just, only to suffer the agony of a failed war. We remember the phrase "sound as a dollar" as an expression of dependability until inflation began to shrink our dollars and our savings. And probably my favorite one, you see every extreme position defended to the last vote, to the last breath. You see balanced and fair positions abandoned like orphans. All right, shout it out there if you know it. Who said it and when? Close? Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter, 1979. Jimmy Carter in 1970. Guys, that was almost 50 years ago. All right, and listen to some of those themes that you're hearing talked about 50 years ago. So 1979, we had just lost the Vietnam War. I know what war was in all of your minds when you thought that was a current thing that I was talking about, right? We've been there. And I know it seems daunting, but there is one theme that was absolutely the same between Jimmy Carter's era in 1979 and what we're dealing with right now, and that's great power competition. Great power competition is back. Back then it was the USSR. And if you asked our population back in 79, they were a 10-foot tall giant. They were technically advanced. They had just beaten us in the space race. They were invincible. They were aggressive, and we were worried. And it starts to erode our confidence. And that's why that speech called the Crisis of Competence speech was given by Carter at the time, to bring people back together. Today, we're dealing with the People's Republic of China. And by the way, they have the same flag. No one seems to notice. All right? And once again, we think that they're a technically advanced adversary, and they're going to tell you how great they are through your social media feeds. And by the way, what Carter says at the end of that speech is, we need to stop crying and start sweating. Stop talking and start walking. In other words, get up and do something. Focus on your world and do amazing at that thing that you can control, because that's how America thrives. So in this great power competition that we're in right now, there's something I want you all to keep in mind. One is a little bit of a practical thing that I do think is important that you take away from this. There is one difference in what we dealt with during the Cold War and what we're dealing with the PRC right now, and Russia, by the way. And that's that you have these two adversaries who spent the last 100 years perfecting population control via propaganda. They are very good at it. And until the early 2000s, they kept that internal. But starting with our social media streams, we have now given them the platforms to turn that weaponization against us. And they are doing it, and they are very effective at it. We have entered the cognitive warfare domain, whether we like it or not. I'm not worried about you guys. You guys stand for something bigger than yourselves. You understand the environment you're in. I'm not worried about you guys. But I'm worried about our population, because they are being influenced. They're being told how great China is and how we're so divided that, Democrats and Republicans are so far apart right now that China and Russia just fit right in the middle, and everything's okay with those guys, right? And I need you to be aware of that. And I need you to process that when you're looking at your streams, that is being done to you on purpose. Russia by brute force phone farm tactics, China by actually controlling the algorithms. Two different methods, same result. This is dangerous, and we're living it right now, and that's one thing we didn't deal with in the Cold War. But the second thing, and the thing I really want to get at here, is that I need everybody to maintain their confidence in this country, because America is incredible. We won the Cold War by staying exactly who we always were. We will win this one by staying exactly who we are right now. Because at the end of the day, all of those values that bring those challenges, those divisions in the macro environment, they're there because we actually have a very engaged society. And no one tells us to do it. No one tells us that we have to stay engaged. Heck, most citizens shouldn't care about our federal government whatsoever, right? In America, we are not our government. We're able to do what we want. We're able to do what makes sense. It's our defining value since 1776. And yet, we as a culture are a very engaged and introspective country. We are critical of ourselves. That is a very important value, something to be very proud of. We say it out loud. We say the quiet part out loud all the time, and then we get after it and we try to get better. And that's something I want you all to be proud of. But mostly I want you to know, as I wrap up here, that I'm proud of you guys, because just like the people that applied for the Thunderbirds when we made everything harder, you have charged for some reason towards the hardest thing. You signed up. I know it's painful right now. I know you're at the academy getting punched in the face every day. But what I want you to do is just take a step back. Just take a step back to when you were in high school and you were applying for this, and you didn't know if you were going to get in yet, and you wanted it, and you got it. Okay? Be proud of who you are. You made it. Lots of people know. And I'm really proud to be able to serve with you guys. I'll be here for you when you're in the Air Force and fighting right alongside you. So thank you guys for listening to me for a little bit. From now, I'll take it open for any questions.